Welcome back, everyone. Today we're going deep, really deep, into a period that, well, it's left a huge mark on Syria.
Oh, yeah. This one is fascinating. I mean, talk about ripples through time. We're going all the way back to the French colonial period in
The
Syria.
French Mandate.
Right.
Right, and specifically how it shaped the Alawite community.
Exactly. And how that, in turn, shaped, well, pretty much everything that came after. I mean, we're talking about a legacy that's still playing out.
It's wild. We've got some amazing sources for this, by the way. Historical analyses, academic texts, the works.
Good stuff. And it gets pretty nuanced, which I love. There are so many angles to consider here.
Okay, so before we get too deep into the Alawite experience, maybe just paint a quick picture for our listeners. What was Syria like before the French even showed up? Like, set the scene for us.
Okay, so imagine Syria, early 1900s. Not exactly a unified nation state as we think of it today.
Not even close, right?
More like a patchwork, right? Different religious groups, different sects, all kind of vying for power and influence. You had your traditional elite, of course, and they pretty much ran the show.
And everyone else?
Well, for a lot of people, opportunity was, let's say, limited. Your social standing was pretty much determined by which group you were born into.
Yeah, not a lot of social mobility. Got it. So enter the French, World War I ends.
And the Ottomans are out.
And Syria becomes, what, a French mandate?
Exactly. And, the French, they came in with, well, their own ideas about how things should be run.
They always do. But I guess their arrival, it really shook things up for everyone, right?
Yeah.
Including the Alawites.
Oh, absolutely. And here's the thing. The French, whether they meant to or not, their policies ended up kind of pushing those existing divisions even further apart.
Divide and conquer.
Classic, right? Keep those groups at odds with each other, makes it easier to control everything. And this is where things start to get interesting for the Alawites.
Okay, so before we go there, just for context, were the Alawites like a major power player in Syrian society before the French mandate?
Not really, no. They were actually pretty marginalized, both politically and economically, but the French mandate period, it kind of becomes this turning point for them. This is where things start to shift.
How so? What changes?
Well, the French, they needed soldiers, right, to maintain order.
Sure.
But for a lot of Sunnis, who were the majority serving in the French army, that was seen as, well, collaboration. It went against their nationalist ideals.
Makes sense.
The Alawites, though, they saw things a bit differently. Maybe because they weren't as entrenched in those existing power structures. They were, I don't know, maybe more willing to take advantage of opportunities even under French authority. So they started joining the military in larger numbers.
And this, I'm guessing, has big consequences later on.
Huge consequences. It's like the seemingly small decision, joining the army, it ends up having these massive ripple effects. It was almost like unknowingly they were setting the stage for their future dominance.
Wow, so the Alawites are in the military gaining influence. What happens next? Where does the story go from here?
Okay, so now we got to talk about the post-independence period. We got to talk about the rise of a certain political party, a party that becomes pretty much inseparable from the Alawite community.
Oh, yeah, I see where this is going.
The Ba'ath Party.
Here we go.
The Ba'ath Party, Pan-Arabism, socialism. It's like
Yeah.
the hot new idea sweeping through the Arab world.
Right, and Syria was, what, right in the thick of it?
Oh, yeah, and you can see why it would appeal to a lot of people, especially after, decades of colonial rule. Like, here's this party promising unity, modernization.
A clean break from the past.
But how did the Alawites, those officers who had risen up through the ranks under the French, how do they fit into this whole Ba'ath Party picture? Okay, so remember those Alawite officers? They'd spent years, right, navigating this complex military system, learning how to gain influence, learning how to, well, look out for themselves. And the Ba'ath Party, they were all about revolution, big ideas. They needed some serious muscle to back them up.
So a match made in, well, maybe not heaven, but definitely in the halls of power.
Exactly. Right place, right time. The Alawites brought the military expertise, the know-how, and the Ba'ath Party, they offered them a path to, well, even more power, but on a national stage this time.
Wow, what a combo.
Right. And this alliance, it all kind of comes to a head with, well, I'm sure you know what's coming, the 1966 coup, Hafez al-Assad.
An Alawite officer takes control. Game changer.
Oh, Hafez al-Assad, smart guy, ambitious, he knew how to play the game. And with the support of those other Alawite officers, he basically consolidates his power, especially within the military. And oh, don't forget the Mukhabarat.
The intelligence service. Yeah, I've heard about them.
Let me tell you, the Mukhabarat, they had their fingers in everything. It was this vast network, this like web of surveillance and control that just permeated Syrian society.
So in a few decades, the Alawites go from this marginalized community to basically running the entire country.
Pretty incredible, right? It's a story about power, about strategy, about seizing the right opportunity at the right moment. And, even though they were now in control, they didn't just, stack the deck with Alawites everywhere.
Oh, interesting. So it wasn't just a blatant power grab.
Both Hafez and later his son Bashar, they knew that just having power, raw power, it wasn't enough. They needed to, I don't know, maintain a facade at least.
So there was some strategy involved.
Always. They'd put Sunnis in these high-profile positions just to make it look, inclusive.
Right.
But it was all calculated. It was about managing the Sunni majority, keeping them, well, at least somewhat appeased.
So keeping things, stable?
Under control. Exactly. And this whole idea of stability, it's super important because for a lot of Syrians who had lived through, the chaos of the post-independence years, all those coups, the violence, Hafez al-Assad's iron fist, well, it didn't seem so bad.
Right. The devil you know kind of thing. Better to have a strong man keeping things in check than, anarchy. But it sounds like a bit of a Faustian bargain,
Yeah.
Trading freedom for security.
You got it. And for a while, it seemed like it worked. I mean, the economy wasn't great, but it was growing. And things were relatively calm. But, like our sources point out, there were cracks. Underneath the surface, this, simmering discontent, especially as the economy started to stagnate. And a younger generation, they just wanted more opportunity, more freedom.
So even with this whole, carefully constructed power structure, even with stability, things were, let's say, less than ideal.
Definitely less than ideal. And this is where we got to shift gears a bit. We got to talk about the social and economic realities that were kind of brewing under the surface.
Oh, this is where things start to get really interesting, right?
Oh, yeah. The story's about to take another turn.
Okay, so we've got to talk about these social and economic pressures that were building up under the surface, even with the Alawites in control. What was the situation like for everyday Syrians, especially, I guess, under Hafez al-Assad?
So you got to remember, stability doesn't necessarily equal prosperity. I mean, Syria under Assad, it wasn't exactly booming.
Not exactly an economic powerhouse.
Right. And for young people especially. I mean, just imagine you're young, ambitious, and you look around and there's just no opportunity.
So high unemployment was a big issue.
Huge. And it wasn't just about not having a job. It was about a lack of hope. The system, it's just rigged against you. And then, you add in the corruption. I mean, our sources, they don't hold back.
Yeah, they paint a pretty bleak picture.
Corruption was everywhere, just eating away at any trust people might have had in the government. And it's this vicious cycle.
Right. Because if you're struggling to make ends meet, if you see, no chance of getting ahead, and then you see all this corruption, well, that's going to breed resentment. That's going to make people angry.
Exactly. And all of this, this powder keg just waiting for a spark.
And then, boom, 2011, the Arab Spring.
It starts in Tunisia, but it spreads like wildfire. Egypt, Libya.
Syria.
Nobody was immune. And you can't underestimate the power of that moment. I mean, people, they saw what was happening in other countries.
And they thought, hey, maybe we can change things here too.
Exactly. So the protests start. People are demanding reforms. They want an end to corruption. They want freedom. And social media, it just amplifies everything, connects people.
Organizes them. And the Syrian government, how do they react to all of this?
Well, not well. Brutal crackdown, force, violence. And it just spirals from there. It's tragic.
And this is where I'm guessing those old sectarian tensions, the ones that were amplified by the French and then, kind of used by the Alawites to consolidate power. This is where they come back to haunt everyone.
It's everything comes full circle. The conflict, it quickly becomes about more than just, economic grievances or political freedom. It becomes about identity, Sunni versus Alawite. And once those lines are drawn, well, it becomes almost impossible to find common ground.
It's heartbreaking. So we've covered a lot of ground here. French colonialism, the rise of the Alawites, the social and economic factors, the Arab Spring, and, the tragedy that's still unfolding in Syria today. What are, the big takeaways? What do you want our listeners to really remember from all of this?
For me, it's about understanding that history, it's not just this abstract thing in the past. It's alive. It shapes everything. The decisions that were made, the opportunities that were seized, the injustices that were allowed to fester, it all has consequences.
Yeah, the past is never really past. It's always with us.
And in Syria, I think the legacy of the French Mandate, the rise of the Alawites, it's at the heart of the conflict we see today.
It's a powerful reminder that, we got to learn from history. We got to understand these complex dynamics of power, of identity, of opportunity. if we ever want to build a better future. Well, that was heavy, but incredibly insightful. Thank you so much for, well, taking us on this journey.
It's been a pleasure.
And to our listeners, thanks for joining us for another deep dive. We'll catch you next time.